right, thanks, Carol. Hopefully everyone can hear me so we can get going. So today my goal is to help you think about what you're doing in the garden as far as the weeds go, giving you some easy to identify weeds that are really nutritious, easy to use as food, in hopes that y'all stop working so hard. But before I get in there, I'll just continue the introduction a little bit. So Merriwether is actually a nickname given to me years ago by my hiking buddies. Whenever we were out in the woods, I was constantly slowing the pack down as I was trying to identify every plant I saw. And there's a lot of plants out there. But my true love, well, okay, plants are my true love, but even more so, the chemicals and the chemistry of the plants. I like to point out that if you can't run, you have to fight. And so plants obviously can't run, so they have developed some really interesting chemistry to make up for that lack of mobility, if you will. Education-wise, my master's is actually in medicinal chemistry, and then I have a PhD in physical organic chemistry. I don't make molecules. I figure out what is the best molecule or combination of molecules for a job. Currently, my day job, I am the medicine man for Medicine Man Plant Co., bringing ancient plants back for modern issues. And as Carol mentioned, also the author, Idiot's Guide Foraging. But that's enough about me. Like I said, you all work way too hard in the gardens. This is just a recent picture of my backyard. Most of these plants, well, actually, pretty much all these plants are edible, medicinal, or drinkable. Most of them were brought to me by the birds, the wind, and other random pop-up occurrences. I guess maybe some possums, raccoons, things like that. So weeds, there's a famous quote that I'm going to completely butcher, but basically a weed is a plant growing in the wrong spot. So like I mentioned earlier, the purpose of this is to help you start thinking about the weeds you might be pulling up and throwing out. And like I said, you're throwing out some nutritional stuff. You're also maybe missing a chance to learn something about your garden itself. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll start looking at these so-called weeds a little differently. Now let's jump right in, starting with amaranth. There's a lot of them popping up right now. It's a very common weed. I will mention all of these plants are talked about in great detail over on the website foragingtexas.com. If you go over there on the left-hand side, the plants are listed in alphabetical order. Each plant has multiple pictures and descriptions that you need to identify it. They also have a region map showing you where in Texas they're found and also where in North America they're found, because sometimes people leave Texas. I don't know why you would want to, but it happens. So amaranth is right at the top of the list as far as nutritional weeds randomly appearing in people's yards. Usually the seeds are very popular with birds, and then the birds eat the seeds, and then they fly around and expel the seeds wherever. So how do you use the amaranth? So the seeds are really good raw. You can use them in salads. You can put them in sandwiches. A real good way of actually thinking about amaranth is a replacement for spinach. So if you are trying to grow spinach, which down here is more of a cold weather sort of crop, if you let some amaranth grow in your garden during the heat of the summer, you got summer spinach. So the leaves, where I mentioned, can be used in salads or raw. You can cook them up like spinach. I'll tell you right now, an amaranth quiche is actually pretty good. So you can use it that way. And those of you who are into fermenting, so in the form of sauerkraut or kimchi, you can ferment the amaranth leaves too. And if you know anything about fermentation, it's a great way of preserving your harvest and a great way of increasing the probiotic nutrients in your diet. So if you're not into making sauerkraut or kimchi, you might want to look into it. It's a really good way of preparing foods. The seeds will be showing up in late summer, and they will be produced by the thousands. They as far as use-wise, think of them as a replacement for quinoa. I always say that word wrong, but quinoa, the little grain type seeds that people spend a lot of money for at Whole Foods or HEB or things like that. So you could have your own almost infinite supply of quinoa if you just let the amaranth go in your garden. What does it tell about your garden? Well, the soil conditions, it's neutral to acidic pH. So if you are trying to grow plants that need a basic pH and you got amaranth popping up, you need to amend your soil. It is an indication that the soil is well drained, which especially here in Houston is pretty important. Also that the soil has a lot of organic matter. Organic matter is always, or most of the time, of benefit in your garden. Some people bring in compost or manure or things like that. The amaranth showing up is a good sign that you are well loaded with organic matter. Now, it does not like clay. It does not like compacted soil. It likes to have free-flowing roots that don't want to struggle too hard through your soil. So it's another good sign. And then full sun. It likes the sun. So if you have a spot in your garden that is full sun all day long, you might actually want to get some of the amaranths and put it in there. I will note that in the landscaping amaranths that you can buy are also equally edible. So if you don't want to let the birds bring it, you can pop down to a local nursery, look at the different very pretty amaranths that they have, and decide which one you want to include in your garden. So it's kind of cheating as far as weeds go, but I won't tell anyone. All right, as far as amaranth goes, are there any questions? If not, we can move on to the next.
Well, I do have a question, and there's one hand that just popped up.
Okay.
Okay. Becky Stemper has a question, so I'm going to unmute Becky. But I did want to ask, because this weed is so spiny, what do you do about the spines?
So there's only one spiny amaranth, pleasantly known as Spiny Amaranth. A lot of the ones that show up in the garden will not have spines, especially more in the kind of the Houston area. The spiny one really starts showing up starting kind of Sugarland and heading down past Corpus Christi. So if you have the spiny one, you can still eat the leaves, you can still eat the seeds, just don't eat the stems.
Okay. So we have it in the Montrose area. It loves our garden. We have tons of it. So so we can harvest the leaves but not eat the stems. I'll have Becky Stemper has a question.
Hi. I was wondering, it's not quite a weed, but it is a weed in my garden, and I just wonder if it's related to amaranth. It looks like lamb's quarter, like amaranth, but it has pink on it.
All right. I will actually be covering lamb's quarter, and then you can have a better idea.
It's different. Okay.
Yeah. Amaranth and lamb's quarter are two different plants. And okay. I'm guessing the pink you're seeing, is it kind of where the stems and the branches meet?
Well, it's actually very bright pink. So I think it's a volunteer non-native. It pops up in our community garden everywhere, but you don't see it in the wild that much.
Interesting.
So,
okay.
And somebody said it's like a lamb quarter.
Well, when we get to the lamb's quarter, you can start looking at some of the other structural features, and I'll try and help you to identify that. I will say at the end, I post my Facebook link, and even through the Foraging Texas website, you can email me. And I pretty much spend at least an hour to an hour and a half every night helping people identify the plants, the mystery plants in their life, because my goal is to reconnect people to nature. So if it's not lamb's quarter, Becky, go ahead and send me a picture one of those ways, and we'll try and figure out what it is.
Excellent. Well, we do have another question from Nanda, who wants to know, when is the seed ready to harvest around here?
Okay, so in the Houston area, even in the late June, you might start seeing it, but through July and into the fall, the growing period is pretty long. It can I want to say the lifespan of the particular weed is about 4 months, but it doesn't all have to start at once. It can start growing in May, it can start growing in June, it can start, growing in July. And then 4 months after that is when you would, 3 to 4 months is when you'd start looking for the seeds.
Okay, and we do have a question from Sebastian in the Q&A, and he wants to know, how do we identify it?
The easiest thing, because we do have a lot of plants to go through, is pop over to the foragingtexas.com website, and it talks about the leaf structures, the seed structures, gives multiple pictures of the plant to help you identify it. So
thank you so much.
Okay, next one, it's a favorite of mine. Now, this is more of a wintertime plant, especially in flower beds and other sort of somewhat manicured areas. But the bittercress, the Cardamine hirsuta, also known as hoary bittercress. And this one, I will say the Texas maps, let me point out that these are created by the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture. I have found their accuracy to be somewhat limited. At the risk of getting in trouble, I would say trust them as much as any other government program. But if you don't see a particular area on the county map colored in with green, if there's a county nearby that's colored in, the plant is probably in the uncolored one too. So in this little cluster of white counties here, you're still probably going to find the bittercress. But this is a member of the mustard family. So if you know the identification of mustards, you're already on the way for that. But if you like horseradish, this is your plant. And the bittercress has a wonderful horseradishy sort of flavor. All parts are edible. The flower, the leaves, the seed pods, the stem, the root, all of them. So the leaves I like in salads, but more importantly in sandwiches. If you like the horseradish type flavor at, say, Arby's or on any sort of roast beef sandwich, you want to take the leaves of the bittercress and sprinkle them in there. Quite frankly, you want to take the whole green tender part of the plant. One thing that confuses people at first, if they take the bittercress plant out of the ground and start eating it, at first, there is no horseradish flavor. It's just kind of a neutral sort of flavor. And then, bam, the horseradish hits. The compounds responsible for the horseradish flavor inside the plant, they don't have a flavor. But once those molecules combine with oxygen and water in your mouth, then the horseradish flavor appears. So you actually have to chew it for a second or two, react it inside your mouth, and then the horseradish flavor appears. If you've ever worked with the horseradish root, an actual horseradish root, when you first start shaving it or grinding it, there's not much smell, and then it hits you. It's not because you're standing away from the root, it's that it actually, the compounds, even in the real horseradish, they need a few seconds to react with the water and the oxygen in the air. But the plant, again, all parts, the leaves, the flowers, the seed pods, even the roots can be used for that horseradish flavor. One of the neat things about this plant is it grows very well in your house, in a flower pot, on the windowsill. Don't put it in direct sunlight. Have it on one of your more shady windowsills where a lot of the other traditional houseplants may have some problems. The thing to know about it, well, first, it will grow all year round inside the house, whereas outside in the Houston area, it is a wintertime plant. It starts showing up November, December, and by the end of March, it is gone. But if you are growing it in a pot in your house, like I said, it will grow all year round. And after a while, you will start seeing the other nearby potted plants having bittercress showing up in it too. This plant, it has a really cool way of flinging its seeds as those long seed pods here, we have the seed pods, as they mature and turn dry, they kind of clamp down under tension, and then something will just touching the plant or a breeze or even just randomly, they will pop open and they can throw their seeds up to a foot away. So if you're growing this in a windowsill, expect to see more of the plant showing up. What does this say about the soil? It says the soil is damp. It really does. It's a high water plant. It likes continuously damp soil, shaded. It does not like sunlight. And like the amaranth before it, it is an indicator of high organic content. So it's if you are looking for real plants, I'm doing air quotes here, even though you can't see me. If you're looking for domesticated plants for that area, look for ones that like dampness, like shade, and like the high organic content. All right, are there any questions about the bittercress?
So yes, there's one question from Carissa, and she asked, are the flavor compounds in bittercress the same ones as in horseradish?
Yes, they are the same molecules as in the horseradish. So the flavor profile is the same. The actual molecules are the same. If you're into the herbal side of things, the medicinal powers are the same as horseradish too. Because the plant is smaller, it does take more of the plant to get the full potency that you would get from the horseradish. I would say the concentration of the compounds per ounce, it's maybe like 75% that of horseradish root. So you may require a little bit more bittercress if you're trying to do a direct replacement for horseradish.
Thank you. There's no more.
Okay. Next one. This is one of my favorites because everyone freaks out by this one. Black nightshade. And here in the Houston area, it is all over the place right now. Very easy to recognize. It's a small bush. If we don't get a hard frost, it will continue to grow all winter long and produce the flowers and the fruit all winter long. At that point, it can grow into actually a fairly large bush, 3 or 4 feet tall. But some of the key identification, if you know what a tomato or a pepper flower looks like, the black nightshade, they're all in the same family, the same nightshade family. The black nightshades, they have the small white flower with a yellow center, the stamen, the pistils, and then the white flowers actually point backwards. And as summer progresses, not only will you have the small white and yellow flowers, but you will have clusters of green berries and blackberries on there too. So as far as locations, again, I can tell you right now, it is all over Montgomery County and areas around the Houston area. So like I said, take these particular maps with a grain of salt. But again, black nightshade, it is an edible nightshade. So let's talk about how you eat it. In particular, what you are after are the leaves and the fruit. So the leaves are really another spinach substitute. The Solanum nigrum is actually non-native. It comes from Africa, where it is one of the primary vegetables of the continent. So over there, they eat the cooked leaves, and then you can also ferment it. I will say you do need to cook them unless you have a really strong stomach. Some people can eat the leaves raw, especially the younger, smaller leaves. But the leaves contain a small amount of a toxic compound called solanine. If you are familiar with potatoes and green potatoes, if you have a potato tuber that gets somewhat uncovered and sunlight can hit it directly, the skin of the potato and the flesh underneath the skin can turn a green color. That green is a solanine, which is mildly poisonous. So it can cause an upset stomach. So the leaves you want to cook, once they're cooked, again, use them like spinach. They're absolutely fine. And kind of, again, spinach flavored for lack of a better way of describing the flavor. I find when you say things taste like nightshade, people get a little worried. So we'll go with spinach. The fruit, It grows in clusters, and you can see here, I just took this picture earlier this week where we have the white and yellow flowers and the green and the black berries. When the berries are green, they are unripe. Do not eat them. When they are black, you can eat them. You can eat them raw. Generally, though, most people will cook them. Think of them as kind of like a sweet huckleberry, blueberry, grape sort of flavor. Again, it's like a sweet nightshade flavor, which is hard to explain to people. So think of a sweet fruit. So in desserts, think of like a blueberry muffin, or if you're baking with it, think like a blueberry muffin or a tart or things of that nature. So it's generally best, because there are lawyers in the world and I don't want to be sued. I'm going to tell you, though you can eat the berries raw, it is best to cook them, especially if you happen to be pregnant or nursing, because the fetus can't handle the same dose of things as a full-sized human. But nibble on a few berries if you want to get the flavor, and then use that to guide your cooking experience, like a nice black nightshade pie, if you will. Think of it almost like little cherries. So anywhere you would want to use a cherry, like a cherry tart, cherry pie, things like that, you can use the nightshade fruit. As far as soil goes, any pH. It does like good drainage, so it does not like compacted or heavy clay soils. It loves full sun. So if you have a place in the middle of the summer where your plants are getting burned, or you don't have you can't put the effort to water it every day, you might want to consider letting black nightshade grow there. Any questions about it?
Yes. Becky asked, can it be confused with a poisonous nightshade?
Okay, so in Texas, the 3 poisonous nightshades are silverleaf nightshade, Carolina horse nettle, and Jerusalem cherry. The poisonous nightshades all have much larger berries, have much larger flowers. So if you pay attention to details, and again, if you go to the Foraging Texas website, you can see I have rulers there next to the flowers and the fruit and all that sort of thing. So if you stick to the small ones, you won't make that mistake. In general, you want to match at least 5 structural features between the plant you're looking at and the reference guide you are using to identify the plant. Less than 5, you can sometimes run into problems.
Okay, thank you. So we have another question. Carissa asked, what happens to the solenoid after cooking? Does it leach into the water?
No, the heat destroys it. It's a non-heat stable molecule, so it just gets broken up and pushed away.
Thank you. There's no more questions.
All right. Okay, next one, we're going back to the wintertime, chickweed. And this is a very common yard weed, people, especially in the Houston area. It really seems to like gather up against fences and houses and places where it's somewhat protected. Found all across North America, one of the key identifying characteristics is the white flowers, not yellow. If it's yellow, most likely that is a plant called horse herb. But white flowers that if you look very closely, it looks like there are 10 petals, but it's actually 5 petals that are very deeply cleft. So 5 V-shaped petals. As far as food goes, so the leaves, stem, and flowers, basically anything tender, leaves, stems, flowers, can be eaten raw in salads. It's particularly good in smoothies, though. If you're the type of person who makes smoothies, definitely throw some chickweed in it, because the chickweed has a natural creaminess to it that, for lack of a better description, turns an icy sort of smoothie almost more into a milkshake sort of consistency. So the same creaminess has a medicinal property of helping soothe irritated and inflamed tissue. Think of it as an aloe vera, or if you know about slippery elm. It has that same sort of demulcent, sort of soothing effect on both mucosal membranes and skin. But a very tasty plant. You can eat handfuls of it raw. Like I said, if you're really good, you throw it in a smoothie. I already mentioned it is a winter into springtime, starting to show up as early as November, definitely December, January. February, it's starting to get a little stretched out. And by mid-March, it's pretty much done. It's going to seed. At that point, not really worth eating. What it tells you about the soil is that you're on the kind of still the acidic to neutral side, but you are low in calcium and the phosphorus. So if you see the chickweed, you might start thinking about some calcium and phosphorus fertilizers. If you don't like it growing in your grass and you don't want to be bothered with eating it, or you're afraid the neighbors might see you and think you're a weirdo, they get used to it, by the way. But yeah, just add some more calcium and phosphorus to your yard, potassium, sorry. And yeah, you're good to go. Any questions about the chickweed?
There's no question about chickweed, but I also post the relevant link in the chat box. If you guys want to know more details, you guys can click into it.
Oh, good. Yeah. Okay, next one, dollarweed. It amuses me that all over Houston in the summer, I don't know if they still put them up, but there used to be a yard care company that said, hey, if you have dollarweed, let us know. We'll come and take care of it. Generally by spraying all sorts of poisons on your yard. Maybe a fork would be a better idea. So let's talk about eating dollarweed. As far as where it's found, it's all over the place. And I don't know if you've ever knelt down in your yard and looked at the flowers of the dollarweed, but they're actually quite pretty. And sometimes it's good to really study your yard close up. You'll be surprised at what you see. What do you eat? Well, you eat the leaves. You can eat them raw, or again, going to the whole fermentation thing, the sauerkraut or the kimchi. If you want to eat the leaves raw, they are actually best when they're small, about the size of a nickel down to about the size of a dime. Smaller than a dime, it becomes kind of hard to pick them. Larger than a nickel, like when you get up to the quarter size, at that point, they start getting a little tough. You can still sauerkraut them or kimchi them at the quarter size, but not much bigger than that. If they get up to the size of a 50-cent piece, those of you who remember what a 50-cent piece looks like, at that point, just pick it and dispose of it or compost it, or just let it be a yard replacement, if you will, if your homeowners association will allow it. But yeah, the leaves themselves, they have a kind of a mild cucumber flavor to when they're really small. And then as they get more mature, they start picking up more of a flavor, kind of like the skin of the cucumber. So they get kind of bitter as they get bigger than a quarter. So from about the size of a dime to the size of the nickel is the prime raw eating. And then from the size of a nickel up to the size of a quarter for fermenting them. As far as season, all year round. And what they tell you about the soil, it tells you your soil is wet and it's compacted. If you see it, if you want to get rid of it, one of the things you might consider doing is aerating your soil at this point. You know, run one of those things that pulls the plugs out, and that will help some. Any questions about the dollarweed?
There's no question about a dollarweed.
All right, moving on. Henbit. Okay, back to a wintertime sort of plant. Henbit start showing up around November, and it's pretty much gone by the end of March. This is in the mint family. So if you look at the flowers and you are familiar with mints, it has a mint-like flower. It has the square stem. It has the opposite alternating leaves. And as I've said before, the map isn't quite accurate. I can guarantee it's up in Montgomery County. and the other counties around Harris County. So the flowers can be eaten raw, and not just the flowers, but the flower head itself, where the flowers are coming out of. The leaves are also eaten raw or cooked or fermented. The stems can be included when the plant is younger, but as the plant matures and gets longer, basically once the plant gets more than about 6 inches long, at that point, you're best just taking the leaves and using them in the salad. Or again, I'm big into fermenting stuff. You might have figured that out by now, but sauerkraut, kimchi, things like that. Yeah, mine has everything in it. So the leaves raw, cooked, like a spinach substitute, fermented, sauerkraut, kimchi. I already mentioned season, spring. So, even January, sometimes December, January, February into March is when you're going to find it. The soil, it requires a neutral pH, so not acidic, not basic, and it does like fertile soil. So if nothing else, it is telling you that your yard or your garden, the soil is quite fertile, and you may not need other amendments other than maybe to adjust the pH some. So any questions about henbit?
There's no question about henbit.
All right. Oh, okay. Horseweed. I only have the picture of this. This is a very common plant right now. If you know what goldenrod plants look like, this looks like a hairy version of goldenrod. This time of year, it will be somewhere between 2 feet tall to about 4 feet tall. A very hairy stem, hairy legs, and hairy leaves, I meant. Not hairy legs, it doesn't have legs. But the leaves of the horseweed are pretty much a direct replacement for oregano. So you use the leaves as a seasoning, use it as a spice, especially on meat. I am a hunter. I love venison. A venison roast for me is not cooked properly unless I have covered it in dried horseweed, butterflied it open, and shoved a bunch of horseweed in it too. You can ferment it, but this is one that you would only want to use a few leaves per quart because it does have a strong flavor. I would experiment some. I wouldn't use more than probably like 1 to 2 tablespoons of the horseweed leaves in your per quart of sauerkraut or kimchi. It starts showing up in the spring and goes into the summer. I have noticed some is starting to produce flowers right now. You can see again over on Foraging, Texas, what it looks like. But for the most part, now is still a good time to harvest. You just want these top leaves, like the top 2 inches of the plant. And in doing that, it will prevent it from going to flower and reseeding. So rather than just ripping the plant out of your garden, consider at least snipping off the top 2 inches, saving that as a seasoning, as an oregano-like seasoning, and then getting rid of the rest of the plant. As far as the soil, it prefers dry soil, non-tilled. So tilling, the seeds actually need sunlight to sprout. So one of the ways, if you have a lot of this showing up on your property, tilling the soil, which has its own issues as far as the overall soil biome and fungus and things like that. But tilling the soil is one way of controlling the horseweed because the seeds do need to be directly exposed to sunlight to germinate. And it is a full sun plant. In the shade, it will be very stunted. In the sun, it grows really fast. Any questions about the horseweed?
We have a question over henbit. So Claire asks, is there a variation of that with white flowers as well?
Variation with white flowers? No. They're going to be purple to pink. I'm trying to think what might be a white flower. But like I said, if you look very closely, I don't know if you can see, depending on what you're using, but the top petal of the flower, it's going to be kind of hairy. as is the throat of the flower. And then the rest of the petals will be somewhat pink with a little bit of white, but then with lots of purple spots. So the general appearance of the flower is going to be purple or maybe slightly pink.
Thank
I'm
you.
not sure. Yeah, I'm racking my brains trying to think what might be a white flowered mimic, and nothing's coming to mind, but I don't know everything. Okay, another common weed is
Sorry for interrupting. We actually have another question over horseweed.
Okay.
So Carissa asked, can you dry it and use it as a dried seasoning?
Yes, in fact, that's even better way of using it, in my opinion. One of the things that occurs when you allow the plant to dry naturally is some of the chlorophyll gets broken down. And chlorophyll, it does have some good health benefits, but its flavor can be strong and a little bitter. So letting it dry and then just using it as another dried herb in your cabinet is a really good way of using it. I actually prefer it dried to fresh. Good question.
Thank you.
All right, Japanese hawkweed. A lot of people mistake this for some sort of small dandelion. While it is in the same family as dandelion, it is not a true dandelion. But because it is close to the dandelion family, it shares a lot of the same structural features. It has the same deeply lobed, pointy leaves. It has what really looks like a dandelion flower, but these flowers are not much bigger than about a 1/4 inch across. And whereas true dandelions will have the same color petal and ray flowers, if you look at the Japanese hawkweed, there'll be this little black specks around the center, around the disc flowers. Also, the Japanese hawkweed will have multiple flowers per stalk, whereas a true dandelion will have just one flower per stalk. As far as where you find them, this map is pretty accurate. So yeah, pretty much all around the Houston and the surrounding counties, and then heading north. And then, so how do you use it? If you know anything about dandelions, you know the flower is edible on dandelion, the leaves are edible on dandelions, the root is edible on the dandelion. In the case of the Japanese hawkweed, because it is so small, the flowers have no food use. The roots have no food use. You're only after the leaves. So you want to get the leaves. You can eat them raw, or as usual, you can ferment them. You can cook with them. If you're going to cook with them, my favorite way of doing it is sauteing them in a little bit of bacon grease, but use them really as if you were using dandelions. So any sort of dandelion recipe that involves the dandelion leaves, you can use the Japanese hawkweed leaves as a direct replacement. Here in the Houston area, it is pretty much around all year. Maybe in the hottest part of the summer, it fades for a while, but definitely in the cool fall and then through the winter and into the spring, and in a shady area during the summer, especially if there's a sprinkler nearby, they can keep going all summer long. So the soil, like a dandelion, they will take whatever you have. They do not care. They just are happy to grow. The soil itself, they do prefer some dampness though. So again, if you have sprinklers or watering the area, that's what it'll take. It's not going to grow necessarily in full sun unless you do have a sprinkler system going. But use pretty much a direct replacement for dandelion leaves. Those of you who have never eaten dandelion leaves, you can also use them kind of like endive, if you're familiar with endive. Any questions about Japanese hawkweed?
Yes. Is it has the same medicinal benefits as dandelion?
No, unfortunately not. With the true dandelion, the flowers have some skin healing properties. The leaves are primarily a diuretic, and then same with the root. But in the case of the Japanese hawkweed, it does not seem to have the same diuretic powers. It has high nutritional value. So one of the things about the true dandelions is how loaded they are with vitamins and minerals. And same with the Japanese hawkweed. It's very loaded with vitamins and minerals, but it's not as potent of a diuretic or lymph cleanser as the true dandelion.
Okay, there's another question asked, is it like the cassia?
Yeah, the cat's ear, the main difference, the cat's ear, its flowers will be all yellow. They won't have the black in there. And the cat's ear leaves are hairy. The Japanese are not. There's also the Texas dandelion that is similar, but much, much, much bigger. The Texas dandelion flowers, are edible. The flowers have the same kind of black ring around the disc flowers, but the Texas dandelion flowers are about an inch across. So the flowers of the Texas dandelion are the same size as the true dandelion and 3 to 4 times bigger than the Japanese hawkweed.
Thank you.
Okay, now on to lamb's quarter. So was it Becky who was asking about the lamb's quarter? So let's see if this is your mystery plant. So lamb's quarter, another super nutritious plant. It starts showing up in late winter. This time of year, it's already starting to go to seed. But one of the key identifying characteristics is what I like to describe as a purple armpit rot, where you have a branch connecting to the main trunk. You're going to have this kind of purple color. The leaves themselves, especially the young leaves at the very top, often have a gray sort of appearance, kind of a powdery gray texture. Map-wise, the USDA, again, as usual, doesn't quite have every incident of it marked on their maps, but it is definitely in the Houston area, the Montgomery County, down in Galveston, down in the Sugar Land area, those sort of places. Left alone in your garden, this will actually reseed quite vigorously, and you will get hundreds, well, maybe not hundreds, but you'll get lots and lots of these plants because they really do produce hundreds, if not thousands, of seeds. So the leaves are best cooked. You can eat them raw, but they have kind of a strong musky smell to them that some people don't like. But once you cook them, that smell goes away and they pretty much end up tasting like spinach again. The seeds are another form of kiwa, if you will. So you can just take the seeds as is and boil them. You can grind them into a flour. Whatever you want to do with them, you can pretty much do with them. You can roast them and put them on an everything bagel. They're really good that way. Season, I apologize, the slide is a little screwed up here, but the season, it is a summertime plant. It'll start showing up in late spring and then go well into the summer. And then in late summer, like in August, it will start producing lots and lots of seeds. This plant can get quite tall. It can get 4, almost 5 feet tall, and it takes on a Christmas tree type shape. So yeah, I guess I don't have a full size there. But as you can see, the stem, it can get more than 1/4 inch in diameter. The leaves and branches are alternating on it. Another name for it is goosefoot, because some people feel the leaves look like the foot of a goose. But the leaves are what you're mainly after, very nutritious. If you're the type of person that likes to freeze vegetables, you can freeze the lamb's quarters leaves. You want to blanch them first, like you would with any other sort of plant. Stick them in boiling water for 30 seconds to a minute, then ice them down quick, and then freeze them. What it says about the soil, it says you have a basic, aka alkaline soil. So if you're trying to grow plants that need more of an acidic soil, and you got the lamb's quarter popping up, that means you need to alter the pH. It does like very fertile soil because it is a fast growing plant and it is a very large growing plant. So at least it'll tell you that the soil is quite rich. Any questions about lamb's quarter?
There's no question over lamb's quarter.
All right. Another really good one, and people often don't realize is edible, is the purslane. This is that deep summer plant that starts growing up in your driveway cracks and your sidewalk cracks and in dry pots and in the sunny, dry soil. Again, the map, not right, but this thing is pretty much found all over Texas. It's actually found pretty much all over North America. But if you look closely, you will see that it's kind of a succulent looking plant. The stems, as they mature, are a kind of a reddish color, thick. The leaves are thick and almost rubbery. If you snap the stem or cut the leaf, it bleeds a clear, colorless sap. So that's one of the key identifying characteristics, is a clear, colorless sap. That's important because the spotted purslane looks vaguely like it. Spotted purslane is much, much, much smaller and does not have the succulent appearance. And the spotted spurge, if you break its stem, it bleeds a white latex. You do not want the white latex plant. You want the clear, colorless sap. Yellow flowers, and I will tell you right now, if you just pull this plant up and toss it aside, you have not killed it. All you've done is spread it, because it is its succulent nature. It stores enough water in its stems and its leaves to continue the growth cycle from flower all the way to producing seeds without it needing to be rooted in the ground. So if you just pull this up and throw it aside, it's going to go through its entire life and still produce seeds and spread the seeds. So edible parts, pretty much the whole thing. The leaves are edible raw. You can also cook it. They're very good with scrambled eggs. So like a chopped up purslane with scrambled eggs, absolutely delicious. I've seen people put it in salsa. That's really good too. The stems themselves, if you want to go through the trouble of removing the leaves and eating the leaves, you can eat the stems raw. If you're going to eat it raw, leave the leaves on. You can cook it, same as like with the scrambled eggs. But the really interesting thing to do is pickle the stems. Use the Ball Book of Canning and Preserving Pickled Okra recipe. It's very simple, very easy. Does not require a pressure canner. It's just a hot water, boiling water pickling technique. But you do want to take the leaves off the stem if you're pickling it and just pickle the stems. You want to wait until the stem is pretty thick. So later in the summer, what you end up with, frankly, looks like a pickled earthworm, which has its uses. If you're the type of person that gets invited to potlucks you don't want to go to, you show up with a jar or two of what looks like pickled earthworms, and they will never ask you to cook for the potluck again. They'll assign you duties like bringing the sodas or something of that sort. So little survival technique for those of you who are more introverts than extroverts. But pickled, they actually taste good. If you're familiar with a lot of the fermented vegetables you get down across Mexico, it's kind of similar to a pickled carrot in a way. The texture is different, but the flavor is somewhat similar. Seasons, the summer through fall, really the hottest, most beastly time of year in Houston is when purslane just goes absolutely nuts, loving it. Dry soil. Neutral to slightly acidic, so pH 6.2 to 7 is its ideal conditions. It does like large amounts of phosphorus. So if you were seeing that, you might even consider dropping back the phosphorus content some in your fertilizers, unless you have other plants that need a lot of phosphorus. Any questions about purslane?
Yes, we have a question asked, are the purslane flower edible too?
Yes, they are. You eat the whole thing. I didn't put them separate just because they're pretty small. And so if you're eating the leaves, go ahead and eat the flowers too. I guess I should have made that more clear. Any other questions?
So we have another question asked. So if there's lettuce, don't eat it, but doesn't dandelion have lettuce up?
Yeah, so in the case of the purslane, The reason you don't want to eat it if it has white sap is because that's actually the mimic of the purslane, which is not edible. So it's not a blanket statement, don't eat things with white sap. It's if you think you're eating purslane, but it has white sap, you're actually eating spotted spurge that has other toxins in it too.
All right, thank you. Okay, so I'm sorry, we have another question actually. Becky asks, I've heard purslane is very high in mineral and vitamins.
Yes, and it's also absolutely loaded in omega-3 fatty acids, which is very rare for plants. So the omega-3 fatty acids are critical for brain health. They make up the myelin sheath that surrounds the neurons that connect the different brain cells and are critical for the information transfer across these neurons. They're also very important for heart health. So for the vegans out there, sometimes they run into issues getting the omega fatty acids because generally they are found in the fats of fish and animal. But if you are looking for a vegan source of the omega-3 fatty acids, the purslane is an excellent source for that.
We have a question asked, is the ornamental purslane that you can buy also edible?
So I recommend, if no one is looking, when you're at the nursery, snag a little leaf and nibble on it and see what it tastes like. I have found that, so the decorative purslanes are technically edible, but my personal experience is the prettier they are, the leaves and stems start to develop a certain level of bitterness. And frankly, they have a, well, the regular weed purslane is quite delicious. The decorative ones, not as much, but there's no toxicity with them. They just, for whatever reason, they don't, I guess they decided I'm pretty, I don't have to taste good to you. I don't know. So
Right.
nibble it, you might get lucky. Okay, another common weed around here, especially in the Houston area, this is all over Memorial Park, is the shepherd's purse. This is another more of a wintertime weed. It grows in a rosette. The leaves, one of the key identifying characteristics are the seed pods. They look like little heart-shaped pouches, if you will, or they got the name shepherd's purse from the leather drawstring bag that the shepherds of biblical time kept their few coins in. The seeds, or the seed pods, they grow in a spiral down the branch, down the stem too. The tip will have young flowers, and then you'll get green seeds, and then the lower go, you'll get some of the brown ripe seed pods, and then eventually you hit this rosette. Again, the map is completely wrong, but it's, it's what you get from the USDA. Houston is filled with, or Harris County is filled with it. Montgomery County is filled with it. Over in Sugar Land, Galveston, all those, they have the shepherd's purse. I can guarantee you that. Uses. So like the bittercress that we saw at the beginning, shepherd's purse is another horseradish substitute. So it has kind of a mustardy, horseradishy flavor, a little more on the mustard flavor, but still a pretty good horseradish flavor. And like with the bittercress, the first bite or two doesn't release the flavor, but as the molecules combine with the oxygen and water in your mouth, they do release a very nice horseradishy sort of flavor. So the leaves, flowers, seed pods, stem, all that can be used raw in salads or thrown in sandwiches or wherever you want a horseradishy sort of flavor. The soil, it will go full sun to partial shade. It doesn't like full shade. In particular, it seems to really like morning sun. The soil itself, it thrives on poor soil. This thing can put a taproot down fairly far, and so it'll dig down into the poor soil where the minerals have been leached deeper into the soil and start bringing them back up to the surface. So it is a good source of minerals. It does like well-drained soil. So again, not damp or heavy clay, anything like that. It does prefer the well-drained but low quality soil. So if you have this growing in your yard or your garden, it's really a sign you need to do amending before you really are going to get really good plants out of it. Or you can eat the shepherd's purse, and that's good too. Any questions about the shepherd's purse?
There's no question over shepherd's purse.
Okay. Does anyone mind if we go a little long? I got a few more plants, or if you want to end it at 8, we can jump to Q&A, but it sounds like there aren't that many questions, so we may as well just keep going. All right, another common yard weed in the Harris County is sow thistle. It looks spiny and sharp, but it is not a true thistle. If you actually started touching it, you would realize that these spines are actually soft and flexible and not sharp at all. The flowers look very similar to the dandelion flower because it is in the same family as the dandelion. One of the key identifying characteristics as you look at the leaves, you will see that they actually kind of wrap around the stem, kind of clasp the stem. The plants themselves can get 3 to 4 feet tall and will have multiple clusters of flowers. It will have leaves running up the stem. And then maps, yeah. Again, all over the Houston area. And again, really all over North America. Sow thistle is actually not native. It came over from Europe where it is grown as a garden vegetable. So this was actually a plant that people choose to grow and eat. Like dandelions, because it is related to a dandelion, the leaves are somewhat bitter. So you would treat them, generally cook them, or use them in salads the way you would use dandelions. My personal favorite part are the unopened flower buds. So if you're looking at the sow thistle and you're looking at the flower buds, if the top is still indented, so if the top kind of dips down into itself, that means the flower has not opened yet, and it is time to pick those and drop them in your jar of pickle juice in your refrigerator and let them soak in there about 6 weeks. What happens is these unopened flower buds end up tasting very much like a pickled caper. Sometimes they are actually called the poor man's pickled caper. So you get this hint of bitterness and this hint of sour that's actually really, really delicious. This is a spring to summertime plant. I like gathering these unopened flower buds, dropping them in the pickle juice, letting them soak until the 4th of July, and then serving them on bratwurst at the 4th of July picnic. Absolutely fantastic relish. The roots, if you pull it up, you will see it has a fairly large taproot. And what I like to do with the root is actually steam it with baby carrots. You can cook it in other ways, but I find the combination of the sweet baby carrots and the slight remaining bitterness in the roots after you've steamed it works together really well. More importantly, my kids like the flavor too, so they don't consider it one of the weird foods that I serve them. Ratio, you would want to use about 1/3 roots to 1/3 sow thistle roots and 2/3 just baby carrots in this steaming process, and just let it go until the carrots are tender and edible, and then just eat them all up together. Maybe put a little butter on it or a little pepper, however you like your baby carrots steamed, or steamed carrots in general, but it's really good. They start appearing in the spring, and they go into early summer around in the Houston area right now. There is still some kind of in the shady areas, but we are getting really close to the end, and there really aren't going to be any of these unopened flower buds. If you look, the flower buds, after they open, every night the flower bud will close up again, but you will see the yellow of the yellow flowers sticking out through the top. So you definitely want these unopened ones where there's no yellow visible, and more importantly, where there's no white visible. White means the flower is now forming the seed pods, or the seeds. So you know how the dandelion has a little ball of seeds you make a wish and blow on? The sow thistle makes a very similar seed cluster like that, a puffball, if you will. As far as the soil goes, mainly it just wants the soil to be acidic. That's all it really cares about, because it is putting a taproot down. It can go into the heavy clay soils, the compacted soils, the well-drained soils. It doesn't care. All it wants is that the soil is acidic. Any questions about the south thistle?
We have one question asking, are the tips you are sharing on cooking or preparing in your book, or are they online?
Yeah, they are over on the Foraging Texas website mainly. Less in the book. The book, there are 30 different recipes, but they're a little more fancy than just drop them in a jar of pickle juice.
I've also shared the foragingtexas.com link in the check box if you want to click and check it out.
Okay. All right, pretty much just one more now, the wood sorrel. You might see this in your yard and think, oh, look, clovers. It is not a clover. If you look at oxalis species, the key indicator is the 3 heart-shaped leaves. Clovers have round or oblong leaves. If they are distinctly heart-shaped, what you would think of as a shamrock or a 4-leaf clover or a 3-leaf clover, that is actually the oxalis species. And they are delicious. Some other identifying characteristics: the flowers will have 5 petals and be somewhat funnel shaped. In your yard, you are likely to have the small yellow flowered version, whose flowers are only about 1/4 inch across. In a shady area, you might get the much larger purple wood sorrel. And if you are into landscaping, there are a number of oxalis landscaping plants that are sold, or landscaping oxalis. Those are also members of the wood sorrel family and are equally edible in the same way I'm going to describe. As far as where, pretty much all across Texas, especially in the Houston area, you're going to find the wood sorrel. So, leaves, eat raw. Flowers, eat raw. Seed pods, these little rocket-shaped things, you can eat those raw. They are found all year round. They have a wonderful tangy, lemony sort of flavor. So wherever you would add lemon to a dish, fish or lamb or chicken or anything like that, where after the meat has been cooked, you can sprinkle the wood sorrel on it and get that same sort of tart, lemony sort of flavor. Even though I say raw, you can also mix it in with a cream soup, like cream of mushroom or cream of potato. Mix about 1/3 cup of the wood sorrel in with the cream soup during the cooking process or just before serving it, and you get a wonderful tanginess added to the cream soup. You can also blend it into butter and make a nice tangy, lemony sort of butter sort of flavor. So as long as you have the 3 heart-shaped leaves, occasionally 4 if you're lucky, the 4-leaf clover is actually, shamrock, that's actually the wood sorrel or the oxalis species. But especially the yellow flowered one, that is going to be available all year round in Harris County and the surrounding areas. As far as the soil, again, pretty acidic at this point. We're talking pH 4, pH 5, so acidic soil, and it does like the good drainage. Any questions about the wood sorrels or the oxalis, landscaping or wild?
We have a question about the ocelus. Are the larger ocelus with purple leaves is edible?
Yes, they're all edible and they're all really, really, really tasty. So if you have the purple ones, like my neighbor in their flower bed, kind of under the bushes and so forth, they have a lot of these purple ones there. So, but they share them with me, so that's good. Free food. Any other questions?
We have another question about the soul thistle. You mentioned about making coffee of soul thistle root on your website. How would you describe the taste of it?
If you're familiar with chicory coffee, it's like that. So there's no caffeine. It's basically a coffee substitute used during war when you are desperate for something hot, brown, and bitter. So on par with chicory, it's related to chicory, it's related to dandelion. So the main use as that is they will take the root, peel the root, chop it up into coffee bean sized pieces, roast those pieces, grind them into coffee ground sized pieces, and then mix them with real coffee to extend the amount of coffee that a person has. So, but yeah, kind of a wartime food. Any other questions?
So we have one question from Nanda. She's asked the larger purple leaves that are triangular of the ocelus, are they edible?
Yes, yeah. They look like almost a purple Batman emblem. But yeah, those are ones that I have in my yard as part of the edible landscaping, and those are also edible. So if you're looking at a nursery and it says oxalis species, or you're good to go. They're all edible.
So we have no more questions.
All right. Well, we have no more plants at this point, so we timed it pretty well, a little longer. But as I mentioned, the Foraging Texas is my main website. MedicineManPlantCo.com is the herbal supplements, the ancient plants for modern issues. If you want to see over 100 hours of plant videos, you can go to my YouTube channel, the Dr. Merriwether. You can get there from the foragingtexas.com website. On Facebook, Foraging Texas, I mentioned just about every day I post some plant that I found that's currently ready to be eaten or is extremely poisonous and you should not eat. So these last few days I've been posting about poisonous hemlock and showing people how to properly identify that so they don't make a mistake between it and the edible wild carrots. Also at the foragingtexas.com, it has a list of my upcoming in-person classes and other online presentations. So like this Saturday, I will be teaching a plant walkabout in person, walking around the grounds of the San Jacinto Battleground Historic Site over on the east side of Houston. All the slots are filled on that, but you can also see upcoming online presentations. During the summer, the classes pretty much died down and will be starting up again in August and September. All right. Any other questions?
We have one question said, yellow prunes edible as well as pine tree needles?
Okay, yeah, Yaupon holly, the leaves aren't eaten, but they make a wonderful tea. Yaupon holly is actually the only native North American plant that produces caffeine. So if you're looking for a source of caffeine in the wild or in your landscaping, Yaupon holly, the leaves have about half the caffeine content of dried regular tea, like the Lipton's tea sort of thing. So you kind of have to double the amount of the leaves, but because they do not have tannic acid, they do not make a bitter drink. They don't turn bitter the way regular tea does if you overbrew it. Then in regards to the pine needles, yes, the pine needles are an excellent source of vitamin C. If you chop them up really fine, there are some good shortbread pine needle recipes online that you can do and use them kind of as a pine seasoning, a pine flavored spice, if you will, in your foods. I use it, or I use the pine needles as a replacement for rosemary when I cook chicken. And then you can also make a very high vitamin C rich tea from the pine needles. So the directions are there on the website.
Cool. We have another question from Carissa. So she asked, can you recommend an app to identify plants or at least to jumpstart the identification process?
Yeah. Okay. So up until recently, I would have said no, but both Picture This and iNaturalist are coming along pretty well, at least as a starting point. But after you've identified the plant using the app, you want to go and look online or other plant identification sources to confirm and match, like I said at the beginning, at least 5 structural features between the plant you're looking at and your guide or your app. There is several good mushroom ones too, but the same sort of rule applies for using the apps to identify mushrooms. But in the case of mushrooms, you want to match up 8 to 10 structural features, because the risk of screwing up and ending up really sick or worse with mushrooms is much higher. So you want to be even more diligent in properly identifying them. Surprisingly enough, when it comes to weeds, the Monsanto pesticide app is actually pretty good. Kind of ironic that I've used that for years to identify weeds so I can eat them rather than poison them.
Thank you. All right, there's no more questions. Oh, actually, there's another one. Would you be available to be hired for a few hours in Montgomery, Texas for a seminar?
Okay, so I get that request a lot. And in the past, yes, I used to do that. But because with the starting up the Medicine Man Planco and so forth, I don't have the time. But at the Bayou Land Conservancy 2021 Gala, which is in the fall, the Bayou Land Conservancy, they're the ones in charge of a lot of the green spaces in the Houston area. At their gala every year, they auction me off. So if you are the highest bidder, if you bid over $400 at their auction, I will come to your property and spend half day with you identifying your plants. So the Bayou Land Conservancy 2021 Gala. You can actually win me.
Cool. So right now we don't have any more questions. I'll go ahead and end this meeting. Thank you so much, Mark, for your information.
My pleasure.
Yes.
All right.
Thanks, everybody. They really
Have a
the class. We got positive comments in the chat.
cool. All right, everyone. Have a great evening. I got to go cook supper now, so I am going to bow out of here. Have a great night. And like I said, you know how to get a hold of me in the future.